Is being political unspiritual? Hi, everyone. I'm Jim McCotter. The word politics is from the ancient Greek word that literally means cities and affairs of the cities or nations. It is the way that people living in cities or nation states make planned decisions. The Greek polis means citadel, city, or community, from a root meaning citadel or hilltop. The polis, or plural polis, or city-state, was the dominant political unit in the ancient Greek world. It was commonly agreed that a polis is a community of citizens organized under a constitution, usually based in an urban center. In ancient Greece, the word polis indicated a city-state such as Sparta or Athens, a self-governing unit. But it also meant more. The word polis, which is the word politics, where it comes from, also encompassed the concepts of both the rights and the obligations of the citizens. Aristotle considered the goodness of the polis, or politics, in terms of whether it promotes the good life of citizens. If this is what politics is all about, and the Bible does not address this, then the Bible has little relevance to life, here and now. And guess what? That's what most non-Christians think about the Bible and Christianity. Worse yet, that's also how most Christians view the Bible, irrelevant to politics, the affairs of our city or nation. That politics is unspiritual, so many Christians even believe. So why did God have the vast majority of His Word, over 75%, written about the affairs of a city and state? Over 75% of the Bible, from Exodus to Acts, is written exclusively about the city of Jerusalem, the state of Israel, and other nations. Why were Jesus' last words in Matthew 28:18-20, where He said, "Go and make disciples of all nations"? Jesus did not say, "Go disciple all churches," or even all people, but rather nations. That has to unequivocally include politics, the affairs of cities and nations. Thus, Jesus commands Christians to affect the politics and governance of cities and nations today. And when Jesus returns, only Christians will govern cities, as Jesus said in Luke 19:15-19. And I quote, "When He returned, the king exclaimed, 'You are a good servant. You have been faithful with the little I entrusted to you, so you will be governor of 10 cities.' And to another He said, 'You will be governor over 5 cities.'" End quote. In the Old Testament, it's all about the affairs of cities and nations. In the New Testament, Jesus commands us to disciple all nations. And Paul and the Christians were doing exactly that. In Acts 17:6-7, it reads, "They dragged Jason and some other believers before the city officials, shouting, 'These men who have caused trouble all over the world and have now come here, and Jason has welcomed them into his house. They are all defying Caesar's decrees, saying there is another king, one called Jesus." End quote. Why do some assume biblical instruction about church issues or family issues is spiritual, but instructing about national political issues is unspiritual or less spiritual? From Exodus to Acts was totally in the context of God's law and national and political issues, not to speak of continual references thereafter. Moreover, most Christians don't know that God ordained not 2, but 3 institutions for today: family, church, and state. And God did not ordain anything to be unholy or ruled by Satan at any time. If a church is unholy, God's people will be condemned if they neglect to work at turning God's church around to be ruled by men subject to the chief shepherd. If a state is unholy, God's people will be condemned if they neglect to work at turning God's state around to be ruled by men subject to the King of Kings. It might be stated that if pastors were preaching the whole counsel of God, Acts 20:27, they would be preaching 3 out of 4 sermons on God's law and our national political issues, since 75% of God's whole counsel, Exodus to Acts, was in the context of God's law and national political issues. This is not to suggest that Jesus Christ is not central to that and the whole Bible, for he is the Word, and the Word became flesh, John 1:1 and 14. However, the biblical political issues of today may be more important to address than any other time since the founding of our nation, since the unrighteous non-Christians are in the final stages of completely taking over one of God's ordained institutions, our nation state, America. Even the Greek New Testament word for church, ecclesia, which Jesus used in Matthew 16:18 to build his church, he said, came from Aristotle's time in Athens, when people would regularly get together to discuss the political affairs of the city and what they were to do. And of course, Jesus himself publicly and continually addressed the political issues of his day. Jesus was doing this every time he was contesting with the Pharisees, who were the political leaders in his day, Matthew 23:2, about the Mosaic law, which was the civil law of Judea at that time. To my dear pastor friends, might your church become more relevant today to the outside world, and more of the outside world come to hear you speak, if 3 out of 4 of your messages today were on the relevance of the whole counsel of God, i.e. God's moral civil law and biblical political issues that's impacting literally every person every day. Sharing more of God's law, you might even have more people saved. 1 Corinthians 14:24 through 25 says that they would be convicted of sin and fall to their knees and worship God, declaring, God is truly here among you, end quote. By the way, the churches on the left, quote, synagogues of Satan, Revelation 2:9 and 3:9, are preaching their, quote, social justice laws every Sunday. They're shouting and twisting scriptures every Sunday, motivating their whole congregations to rise up and turn our nation upside down for Satan. And they've about won, and they will complete their win soon, unless a critical mass of God's people obey his calling and rise up now to take back God's state institution for our King. Faith, prayer, without works is useless, James 2:17. And in Proverbs 1:32, God says, the complacency of fools will destroy them.